Right now, he's the CEO of Snapshot Games. He's the creator and lead developer of Chaos Reborn and Phoenix Point. Please welcome on stage a star in this industry, Julian Gollop.
Hello, good afternoon. Thank you very much for coming. So my lecture today is about how to become a game developer in 5 easy steps. So first of all, who am I? I've already had a great introduction, so I don't need to go over this again. But just to let you know, I have been in Bulgaria for a long time. I worked at Ubisoft Sofia for 6 years before setting up Snapshot Games, and we've just released our second title, Phoenix Point, back in December. So this lecture is about becoming a game developer. It's not specifically about how to get a career in the games industry, but I think my advice here will probably help you in many ways in doing that. But the first rule, the basic overall theme of the presentation is that in order to become a game developer, you have to make games. So where do you start? That's the question. So let's go to step 1, which I call tool up. Now these days, you have an amazing variety of tools at your disposal to make things with. Choosing the right tool for what you want to do is kind of almost confusing because of the choices you've got. Just to take one example, if you're a writer, for example, you can use a program called Twine to create interactive adventures. If you're a level designer, for example, modding tools, which exist in many games, is an excellent way to develop your skills and learn about game development. But I want to take you back to a time when the only tools that were available were pen and paper and cardboard and typewriters. So this is one of the first games that I ever designed. It's called Wizard Game. These are actually the original cards that I made back in 1981. This is before home computers ever existed. Yes, there was such a time. However, this design did become a computer game. So the next step in my career was actually acquiring this device over here, which is Sinclair Zx Spectrum, which has a whopping 48 kilobytes of memory, which is probably less than a desktop icon on your computer these days. But what I did here was basically translate that card game, which I prototyped, into a computer game, and it was published by Games Workshop back in 1985. And the only tools I had at my disposal here were a pen and paper, graph paper to design the graphics, and a relatively simple assembly language editor and compiler. All of the graphics data had to be typed in as numbers. So that shows you how difficult it was in those days. Nonetheless, you could still do really interesting stuff. Just to follow up from that, so Snapshot Games' first title was crowdfunded in 2014, and this was built in a much more modern tool, which is Unity 3D, which is an incredibly flexible tool, released in 2015, and it's still based on that game that I made back in 1981. So you've got some tools at your disposal. The type of tool you want will obviously reflect what you want to do with it. But the next step that I'm recommending to become a game developer is to team up. This is relatively straightforward. You want to find a friend or 2 friends with complementary skills. Do game jams. It's also a good place to find partners to develop games with. You also got some excellent practical game development programs, which of course Arc Academy are pioneering here in Bulgaria, which allow different teams to come together and actually make projects. There's also online hosting for game jams, which is great. itch.io is a great platform if you haven't explored that one before. So step 3. So here we get to the more tricky bits, which is, what are you going to do? What's your idea? How are you going to actually make games? What's your step? And the pitch is all about the idea of pitching an idea. Often you'll have to do that to other people, and I recommend you do it to other people if you're not actually pitching to a publisher or anything like that. It's great to pitch ideas to friends and see how they react. So the pitch, how to do this? You need a lot of inspiration. You need to do lots of research. From my point of view, research usually involves playing games. And you need to broaden your horizons. You need to take inspiration from a lot of different places. I would strongly recommend looking at multiple indie games, even mobile games, not just your AAA products. If the only inspiration you're getting is from Game of Thrones and God of War, then you're going to be missing out on some really interesting innovation that's taking place throughout the industry. So obviously I involve board games in that, very much a great inspiration for many of the games that I've made in the past, and card games and so on. Particularly for a game designer, board games are very, very important to study and analyze and figure out how and why they work. So, a simple process for becoming a game developer and making your first games is this one, 3 easy sub-steps. So, take an existing game or game type. You kind of want to clone it and copy it, understand how it works. Then you want to add your little twist, your innovation, your hook that makes it unique and interesting and different to what's gone before. So we're not looking for complete innovation or something completely wildly new. You've got to understand how something works and how to make an evolutionary step from it. And you need to keep it simple. It needs to be something, a manageable project for you to do, something you can prototype quickly. These rules I will live by. And here's a very important point. So constraints actually promote innovation, creativity, and success. And it's one of the reasons why game jams are really popular, because it forces you to do something within a very tight constraint of time and resources, and it really makes you think innovatively. You've got to come up with something creative very quickly, and that process really fuels your imagination and processes. So I'll just take a few examples here. So Ghost Recon Shadow Wars, which was a game I made with Ubisoft back in 2011. We had a pitch, which was an interesting one, which I put to the editorial board, which was XCOM meets Ghost Recon for Nintendo 3DS. So it's a Ghost Recon universe, an XCOM style game, but with the constraint that it's on this tiny little console. Now, this initial pitch actually didn't work, because when we presented our prototype to the editorial board, they thought it was too much like a PC game. They said, well, you've got to make it more like Advance Wars, which was the standard, the gold standard for strategy games on Nintendo handhelds. So our second pitch was Advance Wars meets Ghost Recon for Nintendo 3DS. And our constraint was that the interface or the UI had to be familiar to any Advance Wars players. The basic mechanism of how you play the game had to be the same as that game. But on the other hand, we had to put in this mechanics for a Ghost Recon style squad-based battle system. So that was an interesting challenge. We started very much copying Advance Wars in many ways, and then we added our own innovations on top. And this was a very successful approach. Shadow Wars was a launch title for 3DS. It was actually the second highest rated title on launch with a 77 on Metacritic, so it worked really well. I'll just take another example here about the Hearthstone pitch. So many of you are probably familiar with Magic the Gathering, the granddaddy of all collectible card games, which was made back in 1993, I think. And here's what happened with Hearthstone. So you already had Magic the Gathering Online. There was an online version of this game. It looks pretty dull. This is the one on the left. So the basic pitch for Hearthstone that the team at Blizzard did was they wanted to simplify the game for online play. So there's none of the interrupts and interactions that make Magic the Gathering very complicated. Second step they did is they opted for a very simple linear mana progression system that replaced the land cards, which you see down here, for Magic the Gathering. So their innovations were actually simplifying Magic the Gathering and actually making it a more accessible and quick-playing fun game that works much better in an online game space. Here's one of my most successful pitches ever. So going back to XCOM, which was a strategy game released by Microprose in 1994. But it's a complicated one. I approached Microprose with a prototype for a tactical turn-based squad game, which was called Laser Squad 2. They wanted to mix in some ideas from Civilization Sid Meier's Civilization, which had just been released, together with the theme of Jerry Anderson's UFO, which is about intercepting aliens coming down to planet Earth. And my little mix-in was this one, Alien Liaison, which is all about alien abductions and cattle mutilation, all the UFO folklore that appeared in the X-Files TV series at the same, more or less at the same time as XCOM was released. So, plus of course our prototype from Laser Squad 2, these were like the ingredients or the pitch for XCOM. Our problem with this one was it was amazingly ambitious. So what was initially a 1.5-year project became 2.5 years. It was nearly cancelled 2 times. When Microprose was bought by Spectrum Holobyte, they wanted to cancel this game because they just did not understand what it was, how it worked. It was quite innovative for its time. So here's our most recent pitch, which was a crowdfunded title, Phoenix Point, which we released last year. So our idea with this one was, again, the foundation of XCOM, but with an ingredient of Lovecraftian horror and the idea that the aliens were an evolving threat, just initially from a virus up to huge monsters. This pitch worked really well, so our crowdfunding goal, let's go back here. So we managed to raise $500,000. We managed to raise $765,000. So it was one of the best crowdfunding projects of 2017 for video games. So it was a very successful pitch, and we put a lot of effort into that. Here's another example. I just took a random example from some recent games. So this is a mobile game, Merged Dragons. The basic concept that they took here is this one. Join 3 things together to make something new. Obviously, it gets a lot more complex than that. You could say it's an evolution of Match 3 games, but it's not really. And they've created from a very simple idea, a very compelling foundation to build and actually make a game on. So there's some examples of how you want to do pitches and think of your unique twist that you're going to make something interesting in a game. So my step 4 is actually to make games. You've got a pitch, you've got an idea. What do you do next? So here comes the most important part of actually getting a game off the ground, which is the prototyping phase. Most projects will have some kind of prototyping phase. And your objective here is to make that simple core game loop really compelling. So the player has an objective to reach, he has a challenge he has to overcome, he has some kind of reward that helps him. And then you need to create a progression so that reward unlocks new objectives. You can also have narrative games with narrative progression, and they may unlock in many different ways. It doesn't have to be a completely cyclical loop, but many games have this core game loop in them. And number 3, the main function of the prototyping, you've got to keep it very rough, very simple, very quick, because it's an iterative process. You're exploring ideas and you're trying to find something that's actually fun and compelling to play. No matter what other ingredients you put in there, no matter how good the graphics are, it has to have that fun factor in your prototype. As an interesting aside, Nintendo used to take the approach when they worked with developers that they would only ever give a developer 3 months of funding. And within that 3 months, the developer had to demonstrate that they were finding the fun, as Nintendo put it. But what that means is proving the concept, proving that your game is fun within that short space of time. If they did that, they would get another 3 months of funding. So just going back to Ghost Recon Shadow Wars, so our second pitch that we did, we made a prototype within 1 week, and this is it. It's a paper-based prototype, got some components from another game, but it was good enough for us to prove the core game loop in the game, and the ideas in this prototype that we made in roughly 1 week survived into the final product. So whatever ingredients you've got in your game, there's obviously going to be art, animation, sound, programming, and so on. all this complex mixture of elements that go to make the game. Your objective is the fun factor, and you have to analyze this in two ways, which is how compelling and grabbing it is, the intensity of the fun, and what's the duration of that fun. So your game prototype has to have within it an idea that you can have some progression or development that's going to keep the player engaged over a large amount of time. But to do this, you've got to do something very important, is to test your prototype on people who have not played it. And you need to do this frequently and often. So when you do this, you need to actually watch what they're doing, but without telling them what to do. Get them to explain what they're thinking as they're playing it. You can take notes or video the session, and then you repeat that with different users, different user types. You get some very interesting feedback. So game development is all about a practical exercise. You create something, you've got to let people play it as soon as possible. You're not secretly buried away in your bedroom working for years and then revealing your final product to the world and expecting everybody to like it. You've got to go with this step. And it's all about iteration. So your development cycle in the prototyping phase is about collecting feedback from your users, prioritizing the things that you want to change or fix, and implement those changes within a very small time frame. Could be a day or two, or it could be a week or 2 weeks. Typically, as Snapshot Games early in the process, we use like a 2-week iteration period. It depends on the complexity of your project, but you want to keep that cycle going so you can inspect and adapt. You repeat this cycle. So prototypes are about testing ideas. They're about exploring things. The idea is you might not be testing just gameplay, by the way. You might be testing something more technical. You might be testing an animation process or something like that. That's absolutely fine. But the point is you need to be able to iterate fast, and if it doesn't work, you get to the stage where you have to throw it away and start again. So step 5, we're nearly at the end. Honing your skills. This is about the experience over multiple games or prototypes and projects of developing and refining your skill sets to become truly a great game developer. So you need to do many things here, many things to get better. Obviously, get qualified is something that people immediately think of. It's relatively easy in programming. There's a lot of programming courses out there because programming is not just a game-related thing. There's a lot of 3D art and animation stuff because that feeds the TV industry and so on. But there are also, of course, more specific game development courses which are much more about my process of developing games. Arc Academy is doing this, so you have project teams, multidisciplinary approach. Practice, make stuff, especially working prototypes or mods of other games. If you develop this habit of just making stuff, you will learn a huge amount. And number 4, put research and study games. Now, this is not just about playing your favorite games. My usual approach is that I try to find a game which is a bit different and interesting and play it, not to the bitter end. I normally play a game probably for a few hours at the most normally to get the idea of how it works. And you need to explore all the different genres because there's a huge variety of stuff out there. You need to look at why games work in different formats, whether it's console or mobile. Board games and card games are a huge resource, especially for game designers or if you're designing a game which has those kind of elements in it. And you need to understand the market. You need to look at gamesindustry.biz and other websites that tell you about consumer trends, what's coming up, what things are interesting in terms of the market development. And if you're going to go for a job at a games company, by the way, they will expect you to have a good breadth of market knowledge. Now, I can talk about career paths in game development. I'm not going to go into any depth here because I'll be quite happy to ask any questions you've got about where to start in a game industry career. But I will make some observation. This is something that can help you enormously. become a T-shaped person. This was a concept that was developed by one of the founders of IDEO, which is a design company, and they specifically looked for these type of people, basically to explain what this is. So a T-shaped person has broad skills and experience in many different areas, but they have deep skills. They have depth in one or two areas. And the reason this type of person is very important in the games industry because of the complexity of tools and processes that we use. Having these skills as a T-shaped person helps with collaboration in teams, integrating your tools and processes, and innovating tools, processes, and ideas. And here's an interesting thing. So consider these roles in game development, which are actually quite scarce and difficult to find. And I'll explain why. So for example, a game designer. So there's no really long-term established academic discipline of game design. You know, it doesn't have that same academic foundation as any of the art or programming courses have these days. So it's problematic. So you've got a lack of an academic discipline, often requires multiple skill sets for a game designer. Secondly, level designer. Again, this is a difficult one because there's not, again, a bit of a lack of academic discipline around this one. It requires multiple skill sets. So level designer will often have to have artistic skills, technical skills, and game design skills, depending on the particular role within the company he's got. Which leads to this point here, the role of a level designer can vary enormously from one game development company to another. Sometimes they're more mission design focused, sometimes they're more artistic and layout focused. And sometimes those jobs are separated and subdivided. Got another one, technical artist. So because of the complexity of modern games development, you know, we need people who actually understand the art tools, game engines, and also have you know, talents either in programming or art that can really glue art and programming teams together, particularly the process where the art goes into the game. So a technical artist could be a programmer who's got artistic background, or an artist who's developed programming skills, very valuable. Fourth one I'd like to highlight is user interface, user experience designer. This has been a massive growth industry in mobile games, of course. But again, the issue there is it requires multiple skill sets. Graphic design, yes, but also user experience is all about understanding how people interact with products and software. So if you're going to be a game developer, following my little 5-step program, you'll become more of a T-shaped person, and I hope will generate more of these kind of roles, which we have a huge shortage of throughout the games industry, and certainly very specifically in Bulgaria. I'm not going to demonstrate this, but here's an exercise that I've done recently with my children, which is to create a game in Scratch, which is a programming language for teaching children, and do it in an afternoon, which is great fun. So these type of challenges that you can give yourself and your friends, like a micro game jam, are great. One of the things I used to do at Ubisoft with the design team, I used to give them some components, like a pack of cards and a dice, and they have to make a game using these components, for example. These kind of exercises really make you think and stimulate your creativity. So finally, we've gone through the 5 steps. I would like to thank very much Arc Academy for inviting me here to speak. Snapshot Games, you will be able to visit us at the job fair because we are hiring now, so please come and see us if you're going to be around next week. I have some time for questions. Again, if you've got any questions about how to start a career in the games industry, or about game development, or my history, please feel free to ask. If someone would like to put their hands up. Any questions? One over there. Sorry, go by the pillar. Have you got a microphone? Will be coming your way.
Пробвам, чуваме се, супер.
Thank you for this chance. I just want to ask you a very simple question. What makes you keep going when it gets really difficult? When you feel like you're losing motivation, if that ever happens?
Oh yeah, sure, that happens. What keeps you going? It's a difficult one. I mean, I'm kind of lucky that I've been able to finish most of the projects that I've started. Some projects I've abandoned or had terminated against my will, but I mean, I guess I'm really invested in that final product. I want to make something great for players, and I want to realize the vision that I've had. So even though it gets difficult, you know, I've had many periods where it's been very difficult financially, for example, running out of money, not being able to pay staff, not getting good response from players, and so on and so forth. But there's always the next game. There's always something new. It's pure creative impulse.
Thank you.
Any more questions? There was a jump in there.
Hello.
Hi.
So my question is, say, if you want to become a gameplay programmer,
Yeah.
for the junior level, for example, in your company or another AAA big company, what is required for a gameplay programmer at the junior level to know, to be able to do?
That's a good question. So Snapshot, we always give our programmers a little challenge to actually make a game. We give them the rules of the game, and they have to implement it using whatever tool they want, using whatever art they can get together. And what we are looking for is the ability to put together a working piece of software and to write good code. So this is what we're always looking for in gameplay programmers. And again, it is very good for you to expand your horizons and broaden your experience by actually making games and not just learning code. It's important that you have an understanding of you know, user interface interactions with the game and how to write real-time systems and so on. If you have personal projects and personal demos that you've done, and you follow my 5-step program, if you want to call it that, if you can actually demonstrate stuff that you've made and coded yourself, this is much more valuable than just having an academic qualification. So I hope that helps.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Nikola. I specialize in 2D art, and I would like to ask that, like, you mentioned about the T-shaped person where
Yes.
you need to have one specialty and know about a bunch of other stuff. And my question is, what would you say is spreading yourself too thin across the skills?
Sorry, what is?
Is there a danger of spreading yourself too thin? Like you cannot have, like
So-
you want to learn about so many things, you don't have enough time.
Is that a danger? I've never seen that happen. So people tend to want to specialize. It's kind of normal. You've got a particular area of interest. So with a T-shaped person, you do need to specialize in something. You need to find something. It might be that you're experimenting with art, programming different types of 2D art, 3D art, animation, whatever, before you find your true passion. But all that experience is still valuable to you. It's always interesting and valuable to try different things, even if it's not necessary for your expertise that you want to pursue. But yes, a T-shaped person will eventually, you will have to specialize in one area so that you become a complementary member of the team. But usually, in my experience, all of the developers that I've seen who have had this breadth of skill have been able to make really quite amazing contributions to a game development.
Thank you. I have another question.
Okay, go away. Come on. What is it?
Would you say that bigger companies value tighter specializations and medium-sized studios and even indie studios would value a broader skill set?
So in the large companies, there is a lot more specialization. If you go to very large game development studios like Ubisoft or whatever, where you have projects with hundreds of people, there are often very specialized roles which are, have often a very highly technical component to them. But even in these big companies, it becomes very important now. These technical artists, technical directors, or technical level design these tend to be T-shaped people who actually have very important functions within those very large game development teams. So obviously, with a smaller company, you tend to have more generalists for sure. And these days, if you're an indie developer and you've got like one of these, very high-featured engines like Unity or Unreal or GameMaker, you can do great stuff without having very specialized people, and which is one of the reasons why indie games are so popular is that tools and resources available to us as developers are amazing, and also our means to distribute them through Steam are great, and even our means to raise money for them through crowdfunding Kickstarter is also pretty good. So I would say, yeah, large companies, there is a lot of specialization, but there's still a lot of room for these T-shaped people.
I see. Thank you.
Hi.
Hi.
I've had the pleasure of attending your lecture back in 2012 or 2013 at OnFest. I think a relatively similar subject as well. And I remember at the time you said you highly advocated the use of board game design as a means to prototype your future game. Do you still stand behind that, or do you think that the tools have grown since then to directly iterate on a digital space in general?
Yeah, I still stand behind that. I mean, it's even possible to prototype pen and paper level design and even real-time games using some simple rules, and it does help you develop your ideas and test them to some extent. Yeah, I do stand behind it. Obviously, my speciality being strategy games, especially turn-based strategy games, it's much easier to take a lot of inspiration from board games and to use board game design as part of the process. Certainly with card games, you could argue, you can also, if you're doing an online card game, then that process is also very useful. But one of the reasons I like board games for teaching about how games work is because everything is exposed to the player. So to make a board game, you've got components and you've got the rules. So a very good game designer will be able to write the rules of that game such that someone will be able to play that game relatively quickly without you having to say anything to them. And that's a difficult skill and a very valuable one.
Thank you.
So hello, my name is Peter. I would like to ask if you can maybe tell us, are there any advantages to stay here in this country and try and start a startup or a company here, rather than, for example, going to the Netherlands, where obviously the gaming industry is much more advanced and has a lot to offer? So I would just like to have your personal opinion, because at the beginning of the lecture you mentioned that you've spent 6 years here already, if I'm not confused. Oh, more, yeah? So yeah, I would just like to know what your opinion on that is. So yeah, thank you.
So are there any advantages to starting game development in Bulgaria as opposed to elsewhere? Yes, there are advantages. I mean, one thing I have found is, the quality of, programmers here is very good. Very high level of math skills compared to UK, for example. Also some very good art skills as well here. as with anywhere, there is a big shortage of skills and qualified people in this area. So I can't say necessarily it's any worse or better than other countries at the moment. But if you're starting as an indie developer, you've got some advantages, like living costs here are cheaper. So if you're selling a game on Steam to someone buying in America, you know, the relative advantage is there. We're in the European Union. This always helps, of course. So being in the European Union makes it possible to hire easily. But I don't know, the weather is nicer than Britain. What else can I say? Although I don't think much of this winter, to be honest.
Okay, yes, thank you very much.